This episode was recorded on the unceded lands of the Kulin Nation.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of POSLink Plus Listen. So when you look at the history of HIV response, there's so many examples of surprising, unexpected collaborations and partnerships. And so in this episode, I sat down and interviewed HIV scientist Jillian Lau and fashion designer Cassidy Ede. And we talked about a very cool, very different collaboration, which was part of the HIV Unwrapped event. And in this interview, you'll also hear from Jill about different types of HIV cure research that are happening here in Australia and the many different ways that HIV positive people can get involved in cure research. So let's get into it. Welcome to POSLink Plus Listen. Thank you so much, Jillian and Cassidy, for joining us today. We're here to talk about your participation in the HIV Unwrapped project. I would like to invite you to introduce yourself. So, Cassidy, would you like to tell the listener who you are?
My name is Cassidy. I've just finished my second year studying a Bachelor of Fashion Design at RMIT.
My name's Jillian. I'm an infectious diseases doctor here in Melbourne and a clinical researcher working in the HIV cure space at the Doherty Institute.
Well, thank you very much. So you two have recently collaborated to combine your superpowers in HIV research and fashion design to produce a garment. The HIV Unwrapped project invites people to consider what you, Jillian, as a HIV scientist, would wear while you were doing your research, which amplifies the work that you were doing. And your task, Cassidy, was to come up with that garment. So I'm wondering, had you ever, Cassidy, thought much about HIV research or HIV before getting involved with this project?
A little bit, but not too much. I think only if I came across it in the media somewhere, like newspapers, online. But otherwise, I didn't go out of my way to look it up and look into what research was being done because it didn't directly affect me as a person.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And what about you, Jillian? Had you put your mind towards fashion design much in your time?
I think if anyone looks at me and what I wear on a day-to-day basis,
so
they
stylish.
can tell that I'm not at the forefront of fashion or fashion design. I had a friend whose younger brother went to RMIT, and I think I went to his showcase in Melbourne Fashion Week, and I think he designed my friend's wedding dress and the bridesmaid's outfit. But other than that, the concept of creating garments, design, so far from my usual world. So this was a real experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
You're usually designing studies rather than garments.
Yes, when I think of design, that's what I'm designing. A clinical trial. It's what I've been designing for the last number of years in my life.
All right. Well, so how did you both hear about this project and what made you interested in being involved?
Well, for me, it was a class. So we have this class called Partnered Projects, and there's 4 different projects that you can choose through. And we had like an info evening via Zoom, and we got introduced to all of the different projects that we could be a part of. And for me, this one really stood out because it felt like the one that would give me the most real life experience. Like the other ones all sounded really great, but this one, there was something interesting and intriguing about having to think about a science element, which I'm really not a science person at all, and putting it into a fashion perspective, which I think when you think about it, science and fashion don't always seem to go hand in hand. So it would be bringing 2 very different disciplines together. And I thought that was a really interesting concept.
Okay. So you're intrigued?
Yes, it really captured the brief really caught my attention. And so I thought it would be a really interesting way to spend the rest of my semester for the year.
And how about you, Jillian?
So I heard about the project through two fronts. The first one was Brent Allen, whose brainchild this is. Brent's been involved with previous work trying to really showcase HIV science, but to a wider audience. And so I'd heard directly from Brent about the project, but also from MHIVE, which is the Melbourne HIV Exchange, which is a group of scientific institutions working on HIV-focused research. And the project was advertised through the MHIVE platform, inviting researchers to put in a scientific abstract, or an abstract at least describing our science in plain language, so not scientific abstract in the sense that we would normally think about it. And that was a challenge in itself, kind of writing that summary in plain language. And I really thought this would be such an amazing opportunity to one, see how someone else interprets the science that I think about day to day in a very different kind of view. But also it was the opportunity to perhaps really showcase the science that's happening in Melbourne in the HIV cure space, which is where I'm focused, and hopefully bring more people's attention to that research.
Okay. So you're both captivated by the brief. It sounds like a great opportunity. So what happens next? You say, yes, I'm in. Can you talk us through the next steps?
Yeah, so after I decided to be a part of this class, and then I got accepted into the class because we have to put down all our preferences, and this was definitely my top choice. We then, on our first week of proper classes, we had like a speed dating with all the scientists. So it was like 15 minutes, I think, and we were on like a group of, I think there was like 4 scientists per table and 4 fashion designers per table, and basically all the fashion students moved around, and we would showcase a garment that we've made previously to sort of show our style, and then we would listen to the different research from the scientists, and they would sort of present it and answer our questions if we had any.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were choosing each other.
Yeah.
And what were you listening out for, Cassidy?
I think I wanted someone who was really passionate about their work, and I was also interested in, like, for me, I'm a very like visual person, so I liked people that had diagrams or something that I could pick up on and create like a visual representation. So the peach caught my eye because of the acronym, to be honest. I thought the research was interesting, using a something that's used as cancer, the thalidomide, which is usually used as a cancer drug or treatment, And so I thought that was interesting of a concept itself. And then I was also really drawn to Jillian's personality as well, the way she spoke very passionately about her work. And I think we sort of hit it off on the first day, which was cool.
All right. So what was that session like for you, speed dating?
Yeah, so it was at the RMIT Brunswick campus, which I've never been on before. So first of all, that was a new experience. It was in the hangar, big, wide open room, where the launch of the garments were a few short weeks later, a few short months
very
later.
Quickly.
So a very brief project.
Yeah, really quickly.
Like 6 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And
so that speed, was we got off on the speed theme was really brought in the first time we all brought together. So us 13 scientists trying to find their 13 fashion designers, and as Cassidy described, the speed dating process and the spinning around the tables and trying to quickly say, this is what I do, and this is what this represents. And so trying to explain science to non-scientists is always a challenge for scientists. I think it was a good practice opportunity for all of us, but also at the same time we're like, we have to try and find someone to connect with, and there's a bit of anxiety, I feel, for the scientists. We're like, what if I don't get picked? And it was
just about to say,
we didn't even make it all the way around to all the tables. I never even met everyone as well.
But the fashion designers brought in a garment that they'd created, so we brought in a scientific abstract, like a piece of paper.
Show and tell.
Last minute we were asked to bring in an item as well that meant something to us, and me being unorganized and non-creative didn't bring an item, and so my item was the backpack that I was wearing, which is a HIV themed backpack because it came from a conference, which is a real nerd fest. But we'll talk about the backpack in a second. And Cassidy brought this garment that she had made for one of your subjects. Is that right?
Yeah,
and it was this really cool raincoat, and it was it had tails, and it was correct me if I'm wrong, Cassidy, but it was inspired, I think, by the Jane Austen-esque period of era in historical England, and I loved it because it was pretty, it was practical, it was waterproof, it had a hood, it had pockets.
Are these your criteria for garments generally?
Well, specifically a rain jacket.
Yeah, a rain jacket with tails. Yeah. I loved the fact that it was practical, but also beautiful, and there was and that caught my eye. So we looked at a lot of art garments, and I'm sure our fashion designers heard a lot of abstracts, but I thought this person is talented, this person is creative, and was not scared off by my nerdy backpack.
I actually loved her backpack. I came up and asked for a photo of it at the end.
You've got to describe this backpack. Is it?
Yeah, it's the one that she has with her today.
Oh wow, I'm seeing embroidery, and I'm seeing a virus.
It's HIV.
Cool.
This is HIV. So it's HIV embroidered onto a backpack.
Beautiful in purples and greens and
blues and orange.
Aquamarine.
Yeah, it's like a light blue. Yeah, I thought it was very practical, but I really like the colors. Okay. I'm definitely a visual person. I was like, yeah, I like that. That's something I can work with.
So just take us back to how you began to approach the development of the garment. How did you, what sort of interaction did you both have, like once you've met? How did you gather the information that you needed to make this lab coat a reality that reflected the peach study?
So I actually didn't find out I was paired with Jill until I got into class in week 3. So then after that, we have a morning and an afternoon class. So in the morning, I went through her research and I highlighted and I did some quick brainstorming on what I thought I could take out of the research and put into the garment. So I started doing some quick sketches. I really liked the idea of having peach motifs to represent the actual acronym, but then because her work is very people focused, I knew I wanted it to have bright colored elements, again, drawing inspiration from the backpack. So I started to think about what can I use? What's my color palette? I had a fully developed design, but I made changes to it. The fabric, I was going to use like a peach cotton, which is what like a lab coat is usually made out of, but I was going to use the peach color. Then I decided the contrast wasn't what I wanted. Like I really wanted you to see the bright colors stand out. So I decided to change to a blue denim. So I met Jill. She invited me for a tour of the Doherty Institute. And when we met, that was the first time she saw any of my designs because we unfortunately didn't get to communicate a whole lot. So after that, because we had each other's details, we were able to exchange secretly a couple messages. I haven't been in a lab since like high school, and they're just student labs. But it was, very bright. Obviously, you have to have bright lights to be able to see everything. But I thought the color of like your test tubes and the containers they were all very fluorescent. And so a lot of my inspiration for the tulle on the go days came from that as well. So I actually got Jill to send me some photos afterwards so I could put it onto my mood board, which was really excellent. And that was the first time I showed her my design. And we only got to have a quick chat about it, but I think she liked it, which was nice. And then I think the next week we had a Zoom consult, which Brent was there for, as well as both my lecturers and Jill. And that's when we talked through the color palette, the design, what were like the key features, where was I drawing key information from. And so that was sort of our last like proper meet up before the exhibition where it had been fully executed.
I got a few cheeky photos, but
they
were still still in progress. But it was so exciting to see that.
Well, look, our listeners don't have any photos, but Jill, I challenge you to describe the garment. But double challenge you to describe it in relation to your research. Okay.
So the garment was based off a lab coat, so a long-sleeved kind of. The lab coat started off being knee length, but this was a floor length garment with the ability to act like a coat, so a cloak. And that this whole project draws on this concept of scientists and lab coats, even though really in this, as a clinician, as a doctor, I don't wear lab coats, mainly for infection control purposes. We don't really use them at all in Australia. They still do in the States. And even from a research point of view in the lab, we don't use these kind of button-up sleeved lab coats. We use almost like the hospital gowns, like a smock kind of. Okay. So we were supposed to bring in the lab coat. And I think all the scientists thought that maybe the designers would put like a motif on the lab coat that we were given. So we all brought these. In fact, I dug up a old school white lab coat from the depths of the Doherty Institute because none of us use them. And then what came back was not a white, sterile looking lab coat at all. It was this beautiful, long, flowing, colorful gown. So this dark denim contrasted with these colorful hand sewn bunches of tulle fabric. Hours of hand sewn work, as Cassidy's mentioned, in these areas called godets, and so these are triangular spaces of fabric used to kind of expand the shape into a more open shape. And you can't see me, listeners, but I'm flapping my arms to show a triangular space. And so Cassidy really used color and contrast, as she was describing before, in this long, flowing, beautiful gown. And the colors represent, as she's mentioned, my sparkling personality, but also just I think the vibrancy of the people who work in this space. And I'm not just talking about scientists and advocates in HIV, but the people who volunteer for these studies, which are really the inspiration for me in my work. So the colorful aspects of that, as well as I think taking this concept of sterile lab coat and turning it into colorful. This is a showpiece. Let's talk about it. Let's generate ideas and inspiration. So that was my take on it. But also I've mentioned when we talked about this earlier as well, just the amount of work and attention to detail that Cassidy's put into the hand sewing, the choice of the colors, the peach motif. It's a huge amount of work, and I think that does represent a lot of the behind the scenes work that science goes through to get to the point of a clinical trial. Which is a trial involving humans. There's a lot of preclinical work, what we call bench-based work or basic science. So I think that was kind of represented subtly in what Cassidy produced as well.
So it's sort of the labour is invisible, even though the end product is highly visible, and it's what attracts people's attention. So you mentioned that the PEACH study.
So PEACH is an acronym for a longer study name, but it's essentially a clinical trial. So a trial involving human volunteers, those human volunteers being people with HIV, and looking at a drug called pomalidomide. So this is immunotherapy, as you've mentioned. It's a drug currently used in cancer to treat specific cancers, including blood cancer called multiple myeloma. The way that immunotherapy works is essentially boosts or kind of gives our own immune system like superpowers to detect and clear foreign things better. So cancer being the prime example, where pomalidomide was introduced and works very well for cancer. But we thought, could we boost our human body's immune system to see and clear HIV-infected cells better? So that's the premise behind pomalidomide. And it's a clinical trial where people volunteer their time, people with HIV and no cancer. And after a very thorough, careful screening and consent process, if someone is deemed eligible and willing to go into the study, they receive 3 cycles of this drug. So 21 days of a tablet, oral therapy, pomalidomide. And then after the second cycle, we ask these people to stop their HIV medication. So that's known as a treatment interruption, which is a big deal in people who are taking their therapy, living perfectly normal, healthy lives, no risk of transmission, no risk of medical side effects or being ill. And then I come along and say, oh, for science, for cure, would you take this cancer drug and then stop your therapy? So it's a huge ask. And I think Cassidy's really reflected that, as well as what we ask our study volunteers to do is huge. And it's such a world of unknown that we're asking these people to go into. So as part of the study visit, they're taking these drugs. They're asked to stop the HIV treatment. We're taking lots and lots of blood samples and analysing them and trying to get as much understanding and knowledge from that as possible. But it's a huge ask, and we acknowledge and appreciate that.
And I just want to echo, the incredible contribution that study volunteers make to HIV cure research. So I want to ask you, Cassidy, can you tell us sort of what you've got out of doing this? What from this project? What do you bring into your future work? What have you learned?
I think I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about the HIV research area, and I don't think before this project I really, as I mentioned earlier, thought too much about it. But after talking to Jill and Brent and the other scientists, it made me want to, keep in touch and destigmatize it in society, because when I would mention this project to different people, they'd be like, oh, HIV, that's an interesting topic. I'm like, well, people with HIV are just like everyone else. They've just unfortunately got this diagnosis. They're, still whole human beings. So yeah, just bringing awareness to the cause and, destigmatize it. And for myself, bringing it into future fashion work, especially for next year, my third year assignments before I graduate, thinking about other worldly issues and things that are going on in society, and how can I communicate that through fashion, because fashion is such a broad area of study, and I think everyone thinks about what they're going to wear on a daily basis. It's such a great communicator to other people, and they you might not even think about it, but you express yourself as a person through fashion, and I think that it's a great way to bring ideas to life and concepts to the surface that we might see on the news or just in the background of something, but bringing it more to a language that people understand. Especially visual learning is people are very visual learners. And so, having a visual concept that people can think about or be drawn to is a really interesting concept and something that I want to explore further.
It's such a powerful tool, and I think, watch this space. I think Cassidy Ede's going to go far.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Cassidy, do you have a favourite fashion era?
I have thought about this question a lot recently. There's always someone that's done something similar beforehand now, because it's always an evolving industry. But design-wise, I really love post-World War II fashion, so the start of the Dior house. I think the amount of work and effort gone into those garments is incredible. I can't imagine how many hours of sewing that they've done. I loved the performative aspects of Alexander McQueen and his era. He was such an incredible designer. I always go back to his work when I'm looking for inspiration for this project, and for the second part of this project, I was looking at Roy Holston, who was a designer who had HIV and unfortunately died of AIDS, and he was an incredible designer as well. I feel like my style is can be very feminine, and so his the way that he portrayed, he created these dresses. He had very a drape style. It was super girly, and I really loved. He had this he used a lot of halter necks, so I really loved that style and the way that he use different techniques to sort of change them up a little bit. He had a lot of gathering in some, and then some were very simple in the way that they were made. So he was excellent. And I also just love today's era. I think everyone's very explorative with their designs, and there's so many new technologies. Like, we're bringing in 3D printing and AI design. I think that's really cool. It's a very size inclusive environment, or it's trying to be, which I think is really important moving forward. Gender inclusivity, and I think that's such a great time to be a part of it. Also trying to reduce our environmental impacts is very important to me. So a lot of my material is upcycled, or I save it for future projects, just to reduce my wastage as well, or reusing calico from past toiles to make a new one, shopping at the op shop for fabrics. I think that is such an important thing, is to think about our climate impact. Yeah.
So much inspiration.
Yes,
Cassidy.
so
Thank you
much.
so much. I want to ask you the same question, Jillian. What is your favourite era for HIV clinical research?
Clinical research.
Yeah.
Wow. I think, as with fashion, in science, everything we have now is built on just incredible work done by the pioneers in the HIV space. We've known about this virus for 40 years now. There's been 40 years of research into managing HIV, and obviously trying to cure HIV, which still hasn't been achieved successfully and scalably in 40 years. So I think, favorite era. I think an important era as a doctor who treats people with HIV is when, in the late 1990s, when combination antiretroviral therapy became available and just really revolutionized HIV treatment. And that, that has been built on over the years. Now we have combination therapy, 3 pills in one, 2 pills in one, injections. We're heading towards weekly tablets, 6 monthly infusions or injections, hopefully. So I think all that was built on incredible science done in the late 90s, and obviously people who volunteered for those pioneering studies back then as well. The HIV cure, people maybe haven't heard or thought much about HIV cure until the first person was cured of HIV, Timothy Ray Brown, and that was published in 2009. But people have been trying to cure this virus since the beginning. But it's I'm always optimistic and excited about where the field is going, in particular in the last few years, probably post-COVID HIV cure era, with the technologies with gene editing and the abilities of gene editing and being able to do that safely. Since COVID as well, technologies with mRNA and nanotechnologies or nanoparticles is really exciting, and just the ability of using nanotechnology to have targeted therapies, so less toxicities, less off-target effects. I think this is a really exciting time to be in this space. I am in this fortunate position to be at the crossroads of the clinical care and this early translational medicine. So I find it extremely exciting, but also acknowledging that we can't be doing what we do now without the huge amounts of work done by scientists and people with HIV who have volunteered in these trials for the decades past.
So earlier, Jill, you when you were describing the PEACH study, which is a treatment interruption study, this is really people really putting their bodies on the line to and generously give of their time to contribute to future knowledge, and hopefully one day kind of the breakthrough moment that will lead, like you described in the 90s, to a complete change of the way that we think about HIV cure. But I wanted you to also tell us a little bit about what other ways people can participate in HIV cure research that are perhaps not as kind of intensive as treatment interruption, and just a little bit of a plug for your work.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. So there's a lot of activity happening in HIV cure research, particularly here in Melbourne. We're really the centre in Australia for clinical trials in HIV cure. And clinical trials are studies which include humans. And so that could be an observational clinical trial where you donate blood, sometimes over time, but sometimes just a once-off. And scientists try and understand as much as possible from the samples that people have donated. So that could be blood, that could be a tissue, a lymph node, a biopsy or tissue sample from somewhere. So we have studies where we're seeking specific bits of people to study. There's what we call social and behavioral research, so surveys, interviews, really kind of detailed, deep down, digging into people's choices and preferences and acceptability for some of the things that we are proposing in these trials, because we can't design a trial if no one's going to come and do it. So there's a huge amount of work which I'm involved with as well in designing these trials that are acceptable, that are safe, but also scientifically robust. And then, yes, there's the interventional clinical trials where someone signs up and they acknowledge that they will receive a intervention, a study drug, sometimes in the form of an infusion or injection, sometimes it's a tablet. And then the most challenging ones I find are the treatment interruptions. And so, people can be involved in all kinds of ways. And what we've tried to do recently to streamline that process is establish what we call the Victorian HIV Cure Volunteers database, and that way people can sign up to, one, get news and information, particularly Australian-led research in HIV cure, but also kind of global advances in the cure space. And they can sign up for that newsletter, but they can also tick a checkbox to say, yep, contact me about surveys, or contact me about donating blood samples, or donating a lymph node, or all of the above. So that way we don't, spam everyone with invites to all kinds of studies. And we are appreciative of people's time. The people who come and do these interventional studies like Peach, it's a huge commitment, and we truly appreciate that. And some people can't do that. We appreciate that too. And the people who come and give us once-off blood donations or a tissue donation are hugely important and hugely appreciated as well. So that information particularly, and information on HIV cure research happening in Australia. We have a website called hivcure.com.au, which does summarize recent updates. It's not Victorian specific like the database and the newsletter, but there is a tab on that website which is, I think, Get Involved, and that lists the currently active recruiting studies as well happening in Australia. But the HIV Victorian database is a bit more specific and can link you in probably quicker with the nearest clinical centre doing these trials. So I'm heavily involved in that process. So thanks for the opportunity to share that. But we would love to have more people on the database, more readers of the newsletter. So thanks.
Thank you so much. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking with both of you. Thank you for all of the work that you do and will continue to do, Jill. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing the journey. And
thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to see what happens next for you, Cassidy, and we'll keep an eye out for your design. So all the best with your studies.
Thank you.
And that's all for now. So thank you and goodbye.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Did you enjoy this episode of POSLink Plus Listen? You can find more episodes on our website or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date. For more information, head to lpv.org.au and join us on our social channels.